Okay, so I'm live again on YouTube, and I'm going to go to the question and answer session and talk about what I was talking about before during the actual conversation. And I'd love to see your questions and hear your thoughts on what we were talking about whether this is the golden era of language learning. So I can see comments now on there, which is perfect. I will also see if I can read the old ones too, because I think they were coming across. So I will see what I can see on there too. I know all the good comments. I'm going to see if I can see them, because I should be able to access the comments in some way. So I don't think it will all be lost. Let me see. And dear. Okay. Dearie me. Okay, so yes, I should be able to open and see this, so I can see some of the comments, and I will just mute it and then be able to read the comments too. He says, hopeful that this will work. So the interesting thing, I think, with language, this idea of improve it, or sort of seeing it as a golden era, I think is very interesting, because many people have seen this or said this over years about different things, the golden era of whatever, and it is certainly something that you hear repeated for every single generation. They would prefer to be in the generation that they're in and not further ahead. So I'm just going to see now, because we have Richard Simcott on, and we agree wholeheartedly, because renowned polyglots like you give us more realistic insights of foreign language learning that are practically applicable. Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's very kind of you. Thank you. So I'm starting on Instagram, just because I haven't got all of the comments through on YouTube yet, but I will get back to them, I promise. So I like seeing all the hellos, so thank you for joining, and thank you for the kind comments. Hello, hola, nice to see you. You speak some 3 languages. Wow, that's cool. Thank you so much. Hi dear, will you also accept anyone in your live? It's going to be a bit difficult to accept people in my live on Instagram. The reason is that I stream on Instagram and on YouTube at the same time, so it would be very complicated to do that. It would be a very odd live for my friends on YouTube, and I like to be able to offer this to both communities at the same time. But thank you for the question. I do interviews on different platforms, and I also do podcast interviews and different things as well. In fact, I did one the other day, and I'm very happy to do things like that in the future as well. Will you accept aloud? Yeah, I think I've answered that. Hello from Kazakhstan. Hello. Okay. Just to comment on topic. Yeah, you can feel free to still comment on the topic. Absolutely. Let's see. Okay. I like that you're saying about, Chinese is a close second to the languages. Possibly, yes. I mean, online, I think just the sheer number of people who speak Chinese, I think, means that it's obviously got a lot of people behind it. I think English, just because so many countries have accepted English and taken English on board, it's actually, as an English speaker, it's quite an odd thing to see, but I guess it's normal for many people. And people in many parts of the world are very proud and to be able to speak English and like to show off that they speak English. I've definitely experienced that in a number of countries where people like to show me that they speak English, even if I speak the local language. And there's kind of almost it's almost like a feeling of, well, I'm also educated, I'm also clever, I can speak English, type of feeling to it. It's something that took me a few years to actually understand why this was happening, what it was about. But in many countries, it's seen as a, it's kind of a badge of honor that people want to make known that they speak English. And I hear many parents talking about their languages, saying their children and the languages their children speak, and they're very proud that their children learn English. Okay. Yeah, they speak a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. What's the language with the hardest pronunciation? Depends on where you're coming from. So there's not necessarily a language with the hardest pronunciation for everyone, because depending on the language or languages you already speak, certain languages will be harder or easier. So, for example, if you speak a language with a lot of consonant clusters and plosive sounds like Georgian, or one of the Slavic languages may have a lot of consonant clusters too, then those consonant clusters are no longer hard for you when you go to another language with similar sound patterns. But for somebody who speaks a language like Italian or Spanish, which tends to be consonant sound vowel, consonant sound vowel, it can be quite difficult to take out those vowel sounds. And what you often find is that they will trip over themselves when they're trying to say consonant clusters, because they need to almost have this innate desire to add in the vowel sounds, and this is quite normal. But then they would find a language like Japanese fairly easy to pronounce, because for I would guess for Spanish and Italian speakers, because Japanese also has this consonant vowel type pronunciation norm, where they're also used to it. And you also hear Japanese speakers when they speak languages, they'll often add vowels to other languages because they're used to doing that. They talk about they have a kind of a syllabary, right? So they will have the letters that you see in the hiragana and katakana. They follow like it's ka, ga, or whatever they have, but it always tends to go with a vowel. There's only n that doesn't. So san, for example, like for to address somebody, the n form doesn't have something after it, but otherwise, pretty much all the others do. They are followed by an a, o, e, e sound vowel, and that maps quite nicely onto Spanish and Italian. On the whole, not completely, but on the whole. So you often find that those speakers have an easier time of pronouncing each other's languages, whereas, speaking other ones might be different or more difficult. Okay, what country are you in? So I'm in Skopje at the moment. So good evening. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining. Come directly. Okay, I think I'm getting close to this for Instagram, so I will then have a look and see if I can get back to the questions on YouTube. I'm so sorry on YouTube that it wasn't showing anything. I'm really surprised that it didn't show me anything, but it was actually when I came out of it and I tried to refresh it, it showed me lots of questions, and I could see that you'd written loads of stuff, so I felt really bad. How would you order your ability in the Slavic languages from best Macedonian, I imagine, to worst? Also, how does your amount of materials in these languages affect how well you could study them? Wow, that's a very good question. So my first Slavic language was actually Czech. That was the first one that I studied, and I did an advanced diploma in Czech studies at Charles University in Prague. I lived with a Czech family for a year, and we spoke only Czech. Again, it was at a time, we're talking sort of, I spent time in the Czech Republic from in 2001 and also in 2004. And what I found was that even at those times, actually, social media wasn't a big thing. It was still very much emailing friends was the main thing on the internet. So that was my strongest language. I don't know where it would come now. It's very difficult for me to say exactly, because I studied quite a lot of Czech. obviously, I mean, I studied the course that you do to go and study in Czech at university. So you use Czech as your language of instruction. So my understanding of Czech and my ability in the language at that time was actually quite high. Nowadays, that course is, I believe, a C1 level course of Czech. I think that's where they take you to. Don't quote me on that completely, but that's what as I remember it, I think that's what it was turned into. So I would naturally normally like to think that my ability would be at Macedonian, obviously, because it's been my home language for 17 years, and then probably Czech. But in reality, my understanding of Serbian, particularly, I think Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian, Montenegrin slightly less because I have never been to Montenegro, but the other three, I do tend to understand pretty well. So I watch comedies in those languages. I can understand a lot of humor. I can understand if I hear a song, I know exactly what they're singing without even thinking about it. And so, from an understanding point of view, my ability in those languages is pretty high. But the weird thing is that because my active use of them, it's very communicative, so I can use them, I can understand them, I don't have to use another language, I can just speak. But sometimes it feels, because I don't use them extensively over long periods of time, I tend to find that they will get influenced, and I'll make mistakes that maybe someone at a lower level of learning might not make. So it's a weird thing because I almost feel a bit of that imposter syndrome, I guess, with those languages. It's quite odd, but I'm also very aware that my knowledge and understanding of the languages is high because of just where I've lived, and I lived in Bosnia as well. So my ability and then to understand them is quite high. And the fact that, as I say, most of the jokes and things that I share with friends locally are in those languages. So to understand humor and to share humor you have to have quite a high level in a language. Jokes are not normally things that you get at the early stages. So yeah, I would probably say those and Bulgarian. Maybe I'd mix in there. Some jokes I do share in Bulgarian, but not as many. I just think typically the former Yugoslav countries have had such a lot of history, and they know the same stars from yesteryear, and also nowadays there's a lot more cultural exchange between Serbia, for example, and Macedonia than there is with Bulgaria. So as they were republics within Yugoslavia, there was always this exchange of culture and language, and that's continued from the republics then to the independent countries that you now see. But yeah, with Bulgarian, possibly it's not too far off actually. I mean, I don't, as I say, I don't have any issue with Bulgarian at all. I can understand it well. Possibly some words might escape me because there hasn't been the same cultural exchange of programs from TV, music. It's not been the same kind of exchange because they went through very different regimes for many, many years. Bulgaria was in a different type of communism to the socialism that was Yugoslavia, and the countries were quite well separated. So there's been quite a lot, I think, of divergence of language and particularly jokes and particularly common day expressions and common day language use. That whereas many dialects of Macedonian will go towards some Serbian, and also there is a linguistic continuum. So I mean, as you go down from sort of the top through, the top of former Yugoslavia all the way down through here, you see that one village to the next or one town to the next, they all tend to speak a similar or same kind of dialect. So there are dialects in Serbia where they don't use as many cases, and there are dialects of Macedonian where in Kumanovo where they will use cases more than in standard Macedonian. So yeah, I mean it's quite a thing, really. I mean, to talk about it in those terms, but it's there are similarities where people live close together, and it's the way as you move towards Bulgaria as well, you get dialects on both sides that sound more similar to each other. Still, despite the historical separation that I discussed before, you still see that because these peoples were mixed for hundreds of years. So of course they've influenced each other, and they've grown together and grown out of each other, and grown together and grown apart, and all the normal stuff that you'd expect anywhere in the world, really, I guess. So yeah, those languages. And then I'd say also, I mean, Polish and Russian are languages that I have used, and I feel fairly comfortable speaking them. So I'd say probably those would come after those languages. And then other languages probably that I've studied and not maybe kept up or not used very actively would be things like Slovene, Slovak, and then I was dabbling in Ukrainian until I got sick the other week, and then I've just been it slowed me down, so I've not been able to keep up with it. So yeah, you have to be honest with yourself when you can't do it. It was just I just had too many other things I had to prioritize, unfortunately. But one day I'll get back to Ukrainian as well. I quite like the idea of learning it. I remember buying French teachers, French Teach Yourself book for Dutch in December. Much easier to engage with it as probably today. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me see. Such a good point, that being able to connect with other language enthusiasts. Yeah, absolutely. And find each other so readily, especially. Absolutely. I really, really believe that. Portuguese, Russian and Portuguese. Yeah, they do have similar pronunciation. So whenever I spoke Portuguese at university, because I learned I learned European Portuguese at university, and when I spoke to Portuguese speakers at the pub or somewhere very typically British, isn't it, to say talk about the pub, but when we'd speak together, we'd meet up at university. People often you could overhear them speaking about what we were speaking, trying to guess which language it was, and many times they would think it was Russian, which is quite funny. It shows a love of learning languages. Yes, absolutely. I think that there's so many cool things about languages. I've reached the end, I think, of the comments on Instagram, so I'm going to go back to YouTube and see if I can get things. Let me just see if the comments are appearing from before. If they are, then I will very happily look for them. Oh, they're not appearing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry on YouTube, but I'm going to take the new ones that have come in, and if I can get the other ones back, I'll have a look through them and see if I can, answer them at some other point. I'm so sorry. Okay. Hur är läget? Ja, bra tack. Ja, och dig själv? Okay, the evanescence of commentary. Yes. Good afternoon, Richard. What is... Okay, let me just make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. The good thing about YouTube is you can make the comments bigger so you can see them more easily. What do you recommend to keep track and setting goals? Very good question, very big question. I particularly like books, and I like courses because it helps to give me a natural option to follow a course, to follow something that I can see and move forward, and I have natural milestones and goals. But this is something we talk about every week in my language learning therapy sessions. You're very, very welcome if you want to check out Patreon and join. You'd be invited. You can ask me about your very specific questions. I'm very happy to talk about them, and yeah, feel free to check it out. Also, if you want to study with me at some point, you're very welcome to fill out the form. One of the questions might be out of date, but the information is basically the same type of thing, where it says what your goals are by whenever date. imagine 3 months I'm talking about. So feel free to check that out as well. You'd be very welcome. And if you're serious about language learning, then I'm very happy to sort of look at taking people on still from time to time. I hadn't looked at that form since the last time, but things change. So I will definitely look back at it from time to time and see who is interested. Türkçe nasıl gidiyor Richard? İyi, teşekkür ederim. Evet, ben dün Türkçe konuştum. Çünkü merkezde bir insan Türkçe, Arnavutça, Makedonca benimle konuştu. Ve bu yüzden evet, ama orada çok Türk var ve evet, çok lezzetli bir baklava yedim. Çok iyiydi. Ve şimdi Star Trek Voyager evet dinliyorum ve Türkçe'de dinliyorum. Dinliyorum çünkü seyretmem, çünkü ben her zaman bir şey işim için yapıyorum ve bu yüzden daha kolay, sadece dinlemek daha kolay değil mi? Ama iyice gidiyor. Teşekkür ederim. Mi pensas que ĉi tio epoke bonegas por lingvolernadon je ĉiuj sferoj. Oni povas lerni senaforto, ni havas ahojn tuj. Mi pensas ke ĝi estas ankaŭ tre bona epoko, sed mi ne scias ĝi estas nur bona epoko kaj ankaŭ kun alia pli malbonaj aferoj, kun kun la lernado bezonas ankaŭ havi motivacion, kaj la motivacio estas pli malfacila dum vi havas ankaŭ alajn aplikaciojn en interreto, kaj tiu plu ĝi estas pli malfacila, sed ŝajnas al mi ke ĝi estas vere por la homoj mem devas ankaŭ decidi se ĝi estas pli malfacila aŭ pli facila proceso. Por mi ŝajnas al mi ke ĝi estas ankaŭ la du aferoj, pli facila kaj pli malfacila. How difficult could it be to not mix up two similar languages when learning them in parallel? Absolutely difficult in many occasions. I find that it very much depends on how similar they sound. So if they sound quite similar, that can be quite frustrating and difficult in the learning process. So that can be a big problem with the learning of two similar languages if they sound similar. But it's possible. It's possible. I mean, at university, I studied Portuguese and Italian at the same time, and it wasn't the end of the world. I could do it. It just took a lot of practice to speak them both. And I think possibly because I learned European Portuguese, the pronunciation was quite different. So this kind of sound, right, was quite different to the Italian. Had I been learning Brazilian Portuguese, I think it may have been more difficult to keep the two languages apart, if that makes sense. That's what I always find. The sounds of the language make it more complicated in my mind. But it's possible. Tiffany, also, what experience you might have with the languages? Tiffany's learning Spanish, German, and Romanian, and occasionally they get a bit mixed. If it's okay, it is absolutely okay, Tiffany. You're completely right. Rahmat, I love it. Nice to see you. Merhaba, Aaron Johnson. What are your thoughts on the approach of using memory palaces to learn foreign language vocabulary? Is it an effective approach? Wow, that's a big question. Yes and no. Depends how much time you need to get your memory palace set up. If it's something you already use and it's for vocabulary, particularly for vocabulary that you would naturally in any language, stop for a second and say, oh, what was that word? Then I think it can be useful. I think it can be quite difficult to use it in a very quick, fast way for ordinary vocabulary that you'd use. I think that probably the memory palaces would disintegrate quite quickly for that kind of vocabulary, because you need it so quickly that you don't have that, even that split second of going to a memory palace and finding a word in the same way. But for example, if you wanted to learn different types of trees or plants or animals or very niche vocabulary in language, then that you would need to think about in any language. Okay, what was that called? Identifying something, thinking of the word for something. And it would be acceptable in speech to do that. Then for those kinds of things, yes, it can be very useful. But not necessarily for common everyday vocabulary, because you speak so quickly, it might be difficult. What do you think about recording some new videos with Emanuele Marini and other polyglots? Vladimir Skoltati would be cool. Maurizio, I mean, if those options present themselves, I'm not against the idea of videos with different people in the language learning community. I think it's actually quite nice. It's been a while since I've made videos, particularly with Emanuele Marini, because we're not always in the same place, and we've had 2 years of COVID, right? So I've not seen him for a while. But I did see him the last time I saw him in person was in Serbia in 2019. I went to an event that he hosted in Novi Sad, and I spoke in Serbian at that event, and it was really good. I mean, he and I actually speak often in Macedonian and Serbian, kind of mix. And yeah, I mean, I would always be happy to talk to him, and if he's happy to talk on camera, then I'd also be happy. He's normally very very open to things, to different things. So yeah, and Vlad's a great guy. I really like Vlad a lot. Have a lot of respect for him, and yeah, I mean, if Vlad wanted to, of course I'd be happy to talk to him. And I think Vlad's got a lot of really cool things to share too. So yeah, I think that he's got a lot to offer a lot of people. So yeah, Horsa would be pretty hard. Yeah, I think so too. These different clicks and getting them right and getting them feeling like they're natural from your mouth, I think is quite hard, is quite difficult. I agree, absolutely agree with that. I have definitely not reached that point with the clicks. I've tried reproducing them, and I've tried them in words, and I have some nice resources for Hosa, but I don't speak it. But yeah, I agree. Making sounds that you're not used to, sounds that for you are alien, in your own language and the languages you speak. I think yeah, that's something to get that you need time and practice to get over, so that they become normal for you. And but I love the sound when I hear it. I think it's very nice to hear. Okay, but let me see. What did you say is your best language? French or Macedonian, I suppose. Oof, it's really difficult. And do you still brain fart moments in those languages? Absolutely, on my word, Billy, absolutely. So I still brain fart in English, let alone French and Macedonian. It's I still get things wrong in every language, and including English, I get things wrong. Things sometimes it's normal. I've yet to meet anybody who speaks any language perfectly, 100% of the time. If anyone out there thinks that they do, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. No one does. We all make mistakes, and we all get things wrong from time to time, and we all are lacking certain elements of vocabulary and finesse, and that's fine. Does that actually make a difference? Not really. There are things that I won't know as well. I mean, there are things that I'm not going to know in French and in Macedonian just because I didn't grow up speaking those languages the same way I grew up speaking English. So there are things in English that I just know intuitively because of the language being the main language I used at school for my main education, for work, for so many things. But then there are also things in those languages that don't have English equivalents now, that I can't translate into English, that only exist in those languages. So it's kind of very difficult to say for sure. But I mean, certainly I would say for me, I mean, English is a language that I think through learning other languages for me has improved my ability and my understanding of English and how it works, and the etymology of English has improved with the learning of other languages for sure. So very oddly, this sounds really strange, I know, but learning other languages has really helped my English, and my English is way stronger than it was from like lessons at school, because I understand different types of grammar that you see in English but you're not aware of, or definitely words. For example, I've learned many words in English through learning other languages. Yeah. Okay, Golden English, yes. Access to better English as a universal increases interest in language learning. In general, Duolingo introduces to a wider public, and that LL doesn't need a class. Yep, I agree with all of that. Gamarjoba, Nadloba. Very nice, I like it. Gamarjoba. Rokorhar. Our things. I've got some words of Georgian left in my brain, but they're random words now, unfortunately. Vietnamese, Cantonese might be a bit trickier to pronounce. Absolutely. Yeah, Vietnamese particularly. I find Vietnamese really difficult to pronounce. Cantonese too, but Vietnamese for me, yeah, whenever I hear Vietnamese, I'm like, oh my word, I can't say that. How did you learn Russian? What resources did you find helpful? Thank you for your help. So, Erin, I was living in Moldova, and Russian was a language that was spoken in Chisinau, where I was, and so I learned to communicate in Russian there. Really, I did learn some Russian. I learned to read some Russian and a bit of the basic grammar and stuff in Spain, and I went to the Centro Pushkin, the Pushkin Center in Madrid, and I had this book of Russian grammar that they used and with exercise. What was it called? Like, I think there's an English version called English Russian Through Exercises or something, and that was the course book, and we used that, and then we used this other book as well. This is a long time ago, by the way, but I used that in the beginning. But when I actually really started speaking Russian, and my Russian's not amazing, but it's definitely functional. It was because I'd already learned Czech and had spoken Czech pretty well, and I also spoke Macedonian and Serbian at that point as well. And so when I got to learn it, like speaking and activating my Russian properly, it wasn't a particularly challenging process, because the whole scheme of how to speak a Slavic language was there. So that was a big help. And then I also did some credits at the university in Sweden for Russian as well. So I studied a course of Russian at the University of Dalarna in Sweden. Let me see. Hey Richard, good to see you too. Dzięki, dziękuję or dziękujemy. You can say all of those. Dzięki, dziękuję, or dziękuję, or dziękujemy. So you can use all of those. Dziękujemy obviously being for we. So yeah, there are lots of different ways of saying that in Czech. Thank you. I'm learning Hebrew and Arabic on A1. I mix both up with speaking, so I'm thinking of stopping one language for a while and continue later. Any advice? Barbara, I think that's a wise decision to leave one for a while and focus on the other one if you're mixing them so much that it's becoming a problem and demotivating you. I absolutely think that that's the right thing to do. I would love to give you more personal advice actually on this kind of thing. These are the kinds of things that we talk about in the groups actually, this kind of issue. And yeah, feel free to, if you want to sort of, even for just a time to join any of those types of groups, let me know. I'll be very happy to talk to you more. But yeah, generally speaking, I think you're making the right decision. Heritage, I think I've seen you speak Swedish, but I don't know how to speak. But you don't know how to speak Norwegian as well as a result of your Swedish knowledge. So Matthias, okay, so my dominant language from Swedish, Danish, Norwegian is definitely Swedish because that's the one I studied at university. I can kind of speak Norwegian. It's weird because it's very Swedishified. Sometimes I make mistakes that are Swedish influenced, but I did study some Norwegian. There was a very angry person saying that they didn't like it when people say they speak Norwegian when you spoke Swedish, and didn't see that as a legitimate speaking Norwegian. But I did really make an effort to study it for, I think it was like a month or so before a trip to Norway, and then I used my Norwegian in Norway. It still was influenced by Swedish, but the languages are close. And but yeah, do I speak Norwegian? I'd let you decide. You could probably say no, and it's not gonna worry me if you don't think I can. But I've studied it. I did make an effort because I wanted to pay respect to Norway and to Norwegians. And I was going to Norway quite a lot at that point. I was going every year, I would go back to Norway. And I just felt really embarrassed that I wasn't even making an attempt to speak Norwegian. I was just speaking Swedish and understanding the Norwegian, and communication was okay. But I always feel a bit bad when I go to a country a lot that I don't make the effort. So I made the effort to learn Norwegian, and yeah, it was a bit wonky, but it was Norwegian, and I was using Norwegian words, and I was using Norwegian grammar. But how well I speak it now, I think, depends on how long I practice it. So if I go back to Norway, I'd definitely try and speak Norwegian again. I can't say the same for Slovak. I think that it's way harder for me to try and go back to Slovak after and before Czech. But I do try and make an effort. Even in Slovakia, when I've been back to Bratislava after the first time I started learning it, I do try and say, nech se páči and things like that in Slovak. But it's fairly tough to separate and put them together, especially when you don't speak them all the time. Whereas Swedish, I run into Swedish speakers even here, and I've used it here as well. Whereas Norwegian, not really. How do you get a better understanding of informal language? I'm B2 in Russian and understand formal media better than informal speaking or writing. I think that's tricky. It's speaking with people a lot, looking at probably looking at trashy magazines. So sort of ones that are aimed at sort of gossip type magazines and newspapers, that kind of thing might have a lot more of this type of language. So maybe things like that, getting recommendations from Russian speakers of what would be kind of a trashy type newspaper or magazine in the language might help you with some of that more common way of speaking. And then practicing it with a Russian and going through it and understanding what it is and analyzing the text. That's probably the best way. Bulgarian is closer to Macedonian now. Bulgaria. Yeah, well, I mean, Bulgarian and Macedonian are sister languages. like with Norwegian and Swedish, you can understand each other. Like you could go to Bulgaria, you could go to Sofia. So Sofia and Skopje, for example. If someone from Skopje goes to Sofia and speaks in Macedonian, the Bulgarians can understand to a large degree, although sometimes people do say they can't understand, which I find very difficult to believe. So last time I was in a restaurant, I was in a restaurant in Sofia, and actually a waiter didn't said he couldn't understand Macedonian because he heard us speaking Macedonian and said he couldn't understand us. So he wanted another waiter to serve us because he couldn't understand, and that really shocks me because, well, first of all, I can actually speak Bulgarian too. So normally when I address Bulgarians, I address them in Bulgarian, not in Macedonian. But it shocked me that somebody would say openly that they don't understand Macedonian in Sofia because the languages are not that different. And yeah, so that surprised me. And definitely when Bulgarians come here, they speak in Bulgarian and people understand. There's some words that are funny because they mean different things. So the word, for example, for a pomegranate in Bulgarian is nar, and nar is a Turkish word for pomegranate. But in Macedonian, the word for a pomegranate is kalinka. Kalinka is the word for pomegranate, and kalinka in Bulgarian means ladybird or ladybug if you're from the US. And so there are some funny like false friends that you have, which you get with Swedish and Norwegian too. So you can make jokes, for example, about things because they have different meanings in the two languages. And grammatically, they're similar, like Norwegian and Swedish. They're similar in terms of grammar, but there are differences that kind of like with verb forms and different things. And a similar thing happens as well. So they are close. I mean, they both lack the standard forms. I mean, there are dialects that are not the same, right? There are dialects of these languages that are different, but the standard forms of Macedonian and Bulgarian also both have things in common, like they don't have cases, for example. Most of the usage of tenses map on quite well. There's certain things in agreement that you don't do in Bulgarian that you have to do in Macedonian. So an agreement of the definite article, for example, when you see something or you do something, it's very important in Macedonian to get that right. Otherwise, it sounds odd. And in Bulgarian, you don't do that at all. So yeah, there are some quite important differences. And also the alphabets are slightly different. So Bulgarian also went through a period of Russification of a number of words have more Russian sound to them, or quality, or origin even. Colloquial Macedonian tends to have a lot more Turkish influence and Serbian influence because of obviously the history with Yugoslavia. So we tend to have a lot of very big differences in colloquial speech, and also just Bulgarian has been through a process of trying to eliminate and eradicate a lot more of the Turkish influence, even though it is still found in Bulgaria and in Bulgarian to a degree. It's not as extensive as it is in many of the colloquial use of Macedonian. And then also certain set phrases as well. In Macedonian, you would find in colloquial speech, we would use complete phrases in Serbian, for example, most typically Serbian, that we just say or use because people know it, or it's got a fun quality to it, or it makes people smile. It reminds them of something. Whereas in Bulgarian, they don't get those things. They don't get those cultural or linguistic references. So just as in Sweden, for example, if a Swede goes to Norway and there's a group of Norwegians at a table, if the Swede goes to the Norwegians and speaks to one Norwegian, they will have quite good communication, almost completely perfect communication, in fact. They will be able to communicate without really many barriers at all. There'll be the odd word that they won't get, but generally speaking, they'll be able to communicate pretty well. So someone from Gothenburg and Oslo, for example, right? But if that same Swede went and joined an entire table with Norwegians to try and interact with the whole conversation going on, they would miss a lot of the context. They would miss a lot of the cultural references. They would miss a lot of the jokes. They would miss a lot of language. And it's exactly the same between someone going from Skopje to Sofia and Sofia to Skopje. They would miss a lot of that language for sure. I mean, I've experienced it myself, where I've been at a table where we've spoken Macedonian and a Bulgarian has been with us and they don't get it. We have to stop and explain. And likewise, the other way around, we will miss things sometimes that Bulgarians say and don't necessarily say in Skopje, for example. So you do get this difference. It would sometimes those things are less of a problem if you go to, say, a southern Serbian city like Vranja and you speak to the people. Sometimes that exchange is less hampered, even though the languages are way more different in terms of grammar. There's I think colloquial speech is actually easier in a weird way with Serbian. Yeah, I hope that explains it, but it's a good question. Thank you. Let me see if I've got any more questions. There are quite a lot of questions, actually. I don't even know if I'm going to get to them all. Eek. I'm so sorry if I don't get to all of your questions, but it's quite a lot. Do you have any anecdote understanding people in some weird, awkward situation? People, of course, thinking that you couldn't understand the languages. Yeah, absolutely. I've had people being very rude about me. This isn't very typical, to be honest. Most people don't. I don't find people use language in that way. But I have had, particularly Spanish speakers from Spain, they can be quite rude when they speak about other people and they think people don't speak Spanish. Like Spanish is some sort of secret language. It's not. Spanish speakers, your language is far from a secret language. But but I did in Czech Republic, actually. I had somebody being very rude about me in Spanish, and I turned around and I commented back and made it known that I understood, and I said that the person who was speaking was an absolute embarrassment to their country for being so blatantly rude about other people on the street. And this person was visibly shocked because, particularly because of the type of Spanish I used as well. But yes, I don't know, describe it as awkward. I'm very straightforward, so it was. I have no problem telling somebody something. That was my time in Germany and the Netherlands. I'm very straight talking when it comes to a lot of these kinds of things. So yeah, and I've got a fairly thick skin. So, but it was quite weird. I'd say it was fairly weird. It's the only time that's really happened though. I don't know if I have heard comments from like that, and again, Spanish speakers from Spain, unfortunately, where I've been, and they've been commenting on about other people or people that weren't close to them, but people that were even like famous people on posters and commenting on them, and I just, I don't particularly like that kind of negative use of language, and for no reason, you know what I mean? It was bizarre, but I didn't do anything with that. I just left them to talk. But I was kind of like, oh my word. And I have heard funny things as well where I've been walking in towns. A lot happened in Prague because there were so many tourists from different places. And I'd walk across Charles Bridge and I'd hear really funny bits of conversation or really silly questions that people would ask or wrong information that people would give to other people about what they were looking at. And I just giggled to myself because it was just really funny, but I had to try and hide it because I didn't want to embarrass them and I didn't want to sort of. It's like people can say what they want to say. I'm not going to stop them, but it was quite funny. Do I have any good German series or movies to recommend? Wow. Quite a few actually. And so I love Lola Rent. I loved Goodbye Lenin. I thought Goodbye Lenin was a brilliant film. Lola Rent is also a really good film. What else? There was one that was set during the Second World War. It was a 3-part series actually in German, and I'm trying to remember what it's called for the life of me. I can't remember. But it was about a group of friends that are living in Berlin, and then some of them go off and serve in the war, and one of them was Jewish, and it was a particularly good series actually. I really, really enjoyed watching it. Thought it was really, really nicely made and well done. I also thought that that period as well, Downfall, I thought was a remarkable film. The interpretations were particularly strong, and again, I think Germany makes some really good stuff, generally speaking. I also just I like a lot of German stuff, but they're the ones that come to my mind now that you've asked. I actually used to watch Gute Zeiten, Schlechte Zeiten, and I used to watch Unter Uns when I was in Germany, which are really popular, long-running German series. I got into them. They're very trashy, but they're quite good. Good for your German, like your colloquial German. They get you used to hearing like German that's used. But yeah, not necessarily wow, but the other ones I mentioned definitely are more wow. Se fossi costretto a scegliere 3 lingue in cui parlare per tutta la vita, quali sarebbero? Yogurt Richard. Io direi, per me l'inglese, si capisce, perché devo comunicare con la mia famiglia. Allora l'inglese. Il macedone anche perché devo comunicare con la mia famiglia. E poi la terza lingua è difficile. Potrebbe essere È difficile per me perché mi piace così tanto il francese e il tedesco. Mi piacciono, tutte e 2. Ma sceglierei magari il gallese, perché è la lingua della famiglia che ho dovuto imparare, perché è una lingua, ehm che hanno preso della mia famiglia per parlare inglese, non parlare più il gallese. Allora, c'è ha un significato abbastanza importante per me come lingua, per tutte le generazioni, uhm che sono stati prima di me qua sulla terra. Allora, per questo motivo io direi il gallese, ma anche mi piacciono così tanto, il tedesco e il francese, perché sono 2 lingue molto importanti per me, per la mia vita, allora è difficile. Sì, ma grazie per la domanda. Pardon. Hey Richard, what's your advice on getting past the intermediate plateau? That's a big question. We'll talk about that again, I think. I like this. Did the string cut off? It did. I'm back. Yes. Do you think that most multilinguals have a top 3? I've got so many questions. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go because I have another appointment starting in like 2 minutes. I have enjoyed speaking to you all and seeing all your so many questions. Oh, my word. It just Thank you so much for all of your questions and for engaging with me so much. You're all wonderful. Thank you. I'm overwhelmed and humbled by the amount of beautiful comments and questions and very good, clever, insightful questions, as well as the lovely comments. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. You'll never understand how grateful I am for your support and for your engagement with me on these platforms. Thank you. I really, really enjoy this time that we have together every week. And for me, it's one of my priorities. I really like it. I really enjoy it. And I hope to see many of you in person at some point. Remember, you can join me on Patreon. You can join me in groups as well. Otherwise, next week I will be back. Remember to like, remember to subscribe, remember to share, remember to engage and write comments. I will look forward to talking to you all next week. I will go back and see if I can check all of these comments and get some inspiration for next week's topic too. Thank you all so much, and take care. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend if you still have weekend left, and happy language learning. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.